Hello. History is dying a long, slow death in America's schools. In most public school curricula, we've gone from 4 years of required history, Western civilization, ancient history in the first year, European history or modern Western civilization after the Age of Discovery in the second year, United States history in the third year, and U.S. government and politics in the fourth. Today, most states have as their minimum requirement a year of U.S. history and half a year of civics. That's it. Find out what your state's requirements are, and then find out how much your school does more than the minimum requirement. My guess is that if your kids go to a public school, or if your locality's public schools are normal, they're going to do the minimum, and that's all. Their resources that used to go to historical education and cultural literacy have systematically gone elsewhere in a series of arguments that go back to the 1970s. We used to be history teachers. Now most departments are social studies because history is oh so stodgy and incomprehensible. Why learn something as subjective as history? And in the 70s and 80s, Western civilization was taken out of the curriculum because, you're teaching young Americans about their cultural heritage as if their cultural heritage is somehow better than everyone else's. So in the name of cultural diversity, the teaching, systematic teaching of the ancient Near East, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the Christian faith, the Middle Ages, modern times, the Enlightenment, the Age of Revolution, the writing of our Constitution, all that stuff. It's no more important than anyone else's culture. Instead, people get a formulaic set of government organization charts from civics and a superficial education in the Constitution as a snapshot rather than as the product of a long thousands-year heritage. And they get a frenzy of out-of-context U.S. history information. Now, since the 90s, a new movement has come along in historical education in our K-12 system. It's called World Studies. World Studies isn't even history. It's sort of a regional geographic set of case studies. But it allows us to spend just as much time on sub-Saharan Africa as it does on Europe. Think about that. Whether or not you're black, white, olive-skinned, yellow, red, or chartreuse, the fact remains the United States is the inheritor and the guardian of Western civilization. It is important that our citizens understand what that means. And you don't get that without history, without an understanding of the slow road, expanding the definition of a fully evolved human being from a single god king in ancient Egypt to include every man, woman, and child. Expanding the franchise from a bunch of kings in medieval Germany to include every non-felonious adult. The journey of these stories and others matters. It informs our freedom. It tells us what the Constitution really means, what is normal and what is not, why government can't just reach into our lives and change things. The reason? We don't belong to them. They belong to us. But the reason why government belongs to the people is in history. We've stopped teaching history in a systematic, rigorous way. Even the notion of teaching knowledge is coming under fire today. Because after all, in the computer age, you don't need to teach people to remember stuff because they can look up anything. Right. And if they have no memory, it's all look-see pigeon. If they have no memory, it's simply monkey see, monkey do, go through the motions. People need to understand. And in a society where so-called information is like fast food, you need to teach people how to memorize. You need to teach people how to hold knowledge in their long-term memory, and not just knowledge. To learn moral lessons from history. How again and again free men of the West stood up against massive slave armies from the East. From the days of Darius and Xerxes of Persia to the days of the Cold War. Moreover, we need to understand how freedom works and what our duties and responsibilities are. How we as citizens can each be a guardian of our own freedom. That comes from a good historical knowledge, not just of the United States, but of the West. We have stolen this from 2 generations of kids. We have stolen the understanding of who we are as a distinct culture and what our duties are that will keep us free. If we, as free citizens, don't carry ourselves worthy of our freedom, we'll lose it. It's easy to be a slave. You simply have to conform and obey. To be a free citizen, to perpetuate freedom, to continue the ongoing experiment that uncommon virtues exist in very common people, you need to understand why. We are stripping our kids of the ability to understand why. We are not teaching them to remember. We are not teaching them to understand. We are teaching them to be good, useful slaves. We are teaching them to go along to get along. We are teaching them propaganda. And we're not teaching them the depth of historical understanding that is the best inoculant against all propaganda of the left, of the right. We owe it to our kids, and if you don't have kids, we owe it to our future, and we owe it to our ancestors to do better. Find out what your local schools are teaching in history. Involve yourself in the department or the board of education locally and demand a return to a 4-year standard of historical requirements, including 2 years of Western civilization. Think on it. Be well.